For over 10 years, we at Climate One have been engaging policymakers, influencers, entrepreneurs, and activists and scientists in broad, respectful, candid conversations about everything climate. Food, energy, water, technology, transportation, housing. We've had huge success bringing together people who think they're on opposite sides of issues. When they sit down and have a candid conversation, they often find common ground and the basis for real solutions. We're emotional beings. Thoughtful, inclusive conversations create the conditions in which the changes we want to see become possible. So I want to hear from you. When you talk about climate, how do you talk about it? More importantly, what do you want to be talking about? With whom? Join the conversation. Even make your own video. Invite your friends to join you. Let's talk climate. I'd like to begin today's conversation by acknowledging the Ohlone and Coast Miwok people who inhabited Bay Area lands for 10,000 years. We'd love to hear from you today, so please share your questions in the comments section of the live stream, or you can tweet them at us using our handle @Climate One. We're recording today's conversation for the Climate One radio show and podcast that drops every Friday. You can subscribe wherever you get your pods. You know, the arts are often on the vanguard of social movements, from protest anthems of the Vietnam era to the democracy goddess that students rolled into Tiananmen Square. Artistic expression often symbolizes advances toward more just societies. On the show today, we'll look at the human destruction of the natural order through the eyes of artists. How are dance, sculpture, music, and other art forms helping us understand the meaning of climate disruption and our relation to it? How is art helping us cope with a world gripped by a pandemic amid political turmoil and environmental collapse? This program is generously underwritten by the Sidney E. Frank Foundation, and we're grateful for their support bringing arts into the climate conversation. The arts are often overlooked in the rush to adapt policies and technologies to heal the climate that sustains us. I'm delighted to welcome two fascinating guests. Alonzo King is a visionary choreographer and founder of the Alonzo King Lines Ballet, a contemporary dance company that tours the world. His dances often involve collaboration with artists from other realms, including singer Lisa Fischer, percussionist Zakir Hussain, and the Shaolin monks. Nora Lawrence is a senior curator at the Storm King Art Center in the Hudson Valley outside of New York City. She curated the Storm King's 2018 exhibition titled Indicators, Artists on Climate Change, which was among the first major museum exhibitions about climate disruption. She's been a visiting critic at the MFA program at Columbia University and taught at MoMA. Welcome to you both. Alonzo King, I'd like to begin when you were young and your parents were active in the civil rights movement in Georgia. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. came to your home. The civil rights icon John Lewis mentioned your father, Slater King, and his wife in his famous speech at the March on Washington on the National Mall in 1963. What's the story of that?
My father was president of the Albany movement, and Martin Luther King came down to try to do what he could to help integrate that city and liberate the chains of oppression that were really strong in the South. And my father was going to jail quite a bit, and my mother went to visit him one day, and she had my sister in her arms, a little baby at the time, and my mother was 7 months pregnant, and the police kicked her in her stomach and beat her, and she lost the baby. There was, because of that tragedy, there was a huge uproar, and Martin Luther King said, please, no retaliation, because the community really wanted to riot. And my mother spoke to the community from her bed and said, please, peace is the answer. Let's not retaliate. And that was an important lesson for me, and life forming. The way that they lived their lives taught me everything.
And you say that you say commonly that you grew up around people who were willing to die for their cause.
It's true. When you're in an environment where first there was such a strong feeling of community that being out of that it's a strange thing when I go places and don't feel the embrace and the focus that was a part of my beginnings, because the community was so locked together, and the idealism and the belief in an idea was so powerful that tons of people were willing to go every day and be beat up repeatedly, to be jailed, to lose their jobs, because most of them did. If they worked for government or anything in the city, they lost all their jobs, and they were ready to keep doing that. And so the succor came from those mass meetings where people got together. And one of the earliest things that I remember is hearing Bernice Johnson Reagan singing as a young teenager at one of those mass meetings. So it was a rich, fertile, and strengthening time for me to be around people who were willing to die for what they believed in. So it wasn't just talk, it was a reality that they stepped into the streets knowing that inevitably they might die, and they were there for the cause.
You also grew up near woods and had an early connection to nature. You say that they were sacred spaces whispering information. So tell us about that early connection to nature.
I think that human beings, we are out of rhythm when we live in cities, and we see skyscrapers instead of the sky. One thing about a landscape, and there's so few anymore, where there's not electric lights and the stars become dominant at night, and that carpet of sky is so humbling. You feel minuscule, and that is an important thing to feel that you are a grain of sand. And when you're in nature a lot, there's a presence that slowly becomes apparent. At first, for most city dwellers, when you get to nature, you resist. And it takes a while. You don't even know you're resisting. And then once you begin to let go and really surrender, there is a presence that is felt. You step into a clock pattern. Sunset and sunrise, you can feel it before they even happen. And so there's a tuning in that tunes you into the cosmic clock. And that is really curing, healing, and informative.
Nora Lawrence, your dad was highly informed and knowledgeable, know lots of things, knowledgeable about doomsday scenarios and others. And one day your mother accidentally converted you into a vegetarian. How did that happen?
Yeah, there was always a lot of purchases for me, like 50 ways a kid can save the earth and things like that, growing up in the early 1980s. And then I started reading a copy of Ms. Magazine that my mom had left around when I was 6 or 7. And in there was an ad for PETA. And I just read it, and just, it was changing everything for me. Like, what? That's meat? That's what that is? And from then it was kind of over. I'd say much to her chagrin, but.
And Storm King occupies about 500 acres of rolling hills and woods an hour outside New York City. How did you approach curating an exhibition that conveys the climate emergency through sculpture?
I think that's a great question, because I think it's really important to what the exhibition became. I felt like it was really important, and I was working with our director as well, David Collins, and our curatorial assistant, Sarah Diver, at the time. And I really felt like it was important to have the experience of climate be an embodied experience for Storm King visitors, to use our beautiful site and our incredible site as a reminder of the stakes at play. We have all different types of natural environments at Storm King. We have 2 ponds, we have woods, we have great meadows, we have lots and lots of acres of native grasses. And so to really allow people to have what Alonzo, I think, was just describing, of that experience of letting yourself go into nature while also thinking about the climate crisis, was something that we didn't want to lose. That it wasn't about an indoor exhibition entirely that just had photographs of other places, but really using our landscape and our environment as a way to let the climate crisis really hit home, that it is here as well as elsewhere, as well as in the Arctic, et cetera.
And Allison Janae Hamilton from Northern Florida was one artist, looked back at her Black experience in nature. So tell us about her and her work of art.
Sure. Allison created with us, I believe, her first ever outdoor sculpture, which is really exciting. And she called it "The People Cried Mercy in the Storm." And it was named after a line from the song Florida Storm that was written and performed by a singer named Judge Jackson in 1928, 2 years after the Great Miami Hurricane, and just before another hurricane in 1928 that actually the recovery from which was the backdrop for Zora Neale Hurston's "Their Eyes Were Watching God." And Allison is somebody who grew up in the Florida Panhandle, grew up near the coast, and grew up as a member of a family of Black farmers, who was hearing at the dinner table from her relatives, from different people who she was eating with, just all of these local effects of the climate crisis and all of these things that the farming community was needing to do that had to do with this. But she wasn't seeing these voices at all represented in the news, on TV, things like that. It wasn't matching what she was sort of seeing in the mainstream news broadcasts. And she wanted to focus on these two hurricanes in 1926 and 1928 that hit Florida and Alabama because of, for one, the way that we can think of this almost as not a news story and really something cyclical, and the ways in which people who have had less access to power, to money, et cetera, have also been historically people who have been the deepest affected by climate crises. After the hurricane in 1928, there were mass graves of Black farmers that were never identified. And so I think she also wanted to talk about the ways in which we use culture as a means of recovery. And thinking about this song, Florida Storm, and the way that it really brought people together. And so her work is something that what I like to think about with people coming to Storm King and seeing this work in 2018 was the way in which they processed it, because what it was this beautiful stack or three stacks, of these tambourines that had been painted white that referenced, and they were situated on an island within our pond. So they were reflected in the water. They referenced music, and then we were actually able to commission a piece based on that song, Florida Storm, by a group that came and performed it 2 times in October. So we were able to activate the piece as well. But I love that people might have come to Storm King and seen something that seemed a little bit more abstract, but then we're able to learn about the piece, hear on our audio guide from our signage, Allison speaking about it herself, and think about the ways in which that culture really does have a place and a part in thinking about climate, in gathering together around climate, and in healing and mourning after moments of crisis. Greg, you're on mute.
Alonzo King, I want to ask you to make sure that you hope your microphone isn't rubbing against your chin. When you think about, Alonzo King, when you think about climate change, what comes to mind for you as an artist? There's so much information and so much grief, so much loss. How do you process that as an artist?
I think that it reduces to something as complicated and as huge as it is. It really, in its reduction, and which is the art process, which is so interesting, is that you are talking about ideas that are so big, and you have to reduce them into symbology. You have to make them a sort of an algebra, so that symbols are really reference for things that are much larger, or words don't have the capacity to really grasp. But when you reduce what we've done to the climate, what we've done to this planet, it is selfishness and greed, plain and simple, selfishness and greed. And it comes from the irony of not knowing who and what we are, and thinking that ourselves is our bodies. And our bodies are not ourselves, they're separate. It also is an error in education because we don't know what human beings are. We're not those bodies, we're souls playing roles. And if people were to recognize that human beings are valuable, just the fact that they were born. I meet tons of people all the time who lament the fact that they feel worthless unless they have a degree from this place, unless they have money, this amount of money, unless they have celebrity. This is a horrible, horrible education. And so if this is the thinking of the masses, and it is, then we have set up a caste system where certain kind of people are important and other people are less important or not important at all. The same mechanism, the same thinking is what has made art elitist and separate and ivory tower away from the common herd of eaters. And that has to be destroyed. I look at it that every human being, if they are serious about their life, is some kind of artist. And my definition is, and I think people really should look at words and find their own definition, meaning they should search for what is the essence of this idea? How do I see it? And I see that art is the knowledge of how things are done. Bottom line, whether that's the art of government, whether it's crops, whether it's how to treat people. And the highest art is the art of living. Emerson said so beautifully that the goal of art is higher than art itself, meaning that through that culture and practice, we would reveal ourselves as human masterpieces, and that is the aim. And so the separation of caste that we have set up in terms of humans being low and high, important, non-important, same way that we do art, it is a horror. And so we're missing an internal dialogue. We're missing what St. John calls the 7 candles, what yogis call the chakras in the body. We're missing that staircase of wonder and limitless potential. And of course, that will come to the fore. That will come to the fore through science, through the practice of yoga, through people who during this pandemic are forced to examine their lives. They can't run away into busyness. They have to examine, what am I doing? What do I want to change? What do I want to contribute to the world? How do I want to depart from the world and feel and look back and say, well done? These are the important questions, and this is the artistic life. This is the artistic way, that kind of self-reform of the painting of the book, of the choreography, and the human being. And so if we're serious, we have to say, what have I contributed to this problem? If I've come to a place where I feel I've left the sense of me and expanded the sense of we, and have stepped into the idea of oneness, how can I exploit a mountain? How can I exploit a people? Because I've gotten to a place where I realize that people, that mountain is me. That ocean that my country is going to and polluting is me. The earliest folks who I remember talking about climate change and the problems they're in were indigenous people, saying, I can't fish anymore. What is that thing called shell that comes to my country and does this? I mean, they were saying it long before other people, because they were aware of their participation in nature and its changes, and destruction was run amok. So how we treat people is connected to how we think about ourselves and what we think people are.
Nora, I'd like to get your response to a lot in there, including how art can take something so massive as climate change and bring it down to a human scale, and something we can kind of, we can respond to, that's more relatable, even if it's a little bit abstract.
Absolutely. And I think one work that was very well loved in our exhibition was by an artist named Jenny Kendler, who I think did that also in a way that you were just speaking of, Alonzo. She used the term human exceptionalism, this idea that as humans, we're not allowing ourselves to be part of nature, right? And it lets us make these decisions to extract whatever we're extracting from that mountain, or kill all those fish, or do whatever we need to do, because we don't think of ourselves as just another species. So she did this project called Birds Watching, and she made 100 large-scale replicas of the eyes of different birds that are endangered or threatened with extinction because of climate change within the next 50 years. And she put these 100 eyes out, and they were on kind of the same reflective material. They were full color, but the same reflective material as highway signs. So if you were to take a iPhone shot of them with a flash or something, they'd flash back at you. So they have kind of this nature that is also looking back at you, and they're the eyes. So they're saying, what's different between you and the birds, right? How can you just make this category for yourself called bird and not even think that these are individuals as well? And I think that helps people. I think that zeroing in on these moments beyond what you referenced, Alonzo, at the beginning of what you were saying, is just this kind of mass of horror, right? Or this thing that's just way too big for us to kind of keep in mind all the time. But if we look at different parts of it, we can sort of use that almost as a synecdoche for the whole, right? And think about something bigger as well. And I think that's really important for people to be able to do, and that's something that art can help with.
And Alonzo, can you talk about how the human body is a replica of the planet, and that most humans are denatured? What do you mean by that?
The first thing I was thinking was that when you look at indigenous cultures, even the idea, when someone would say, sign this paper, the idea that someone could own land was such a query that how do you grab that to say, how can I own the land? How is that possible? and the idea also that the earth is mother. And how do you treat mother? A really important question. How do we treat mother? How do we look at women? Big question. And so the nurturer, we're destroying, because there is an abstract idea that this is a planet that we can exploit, instead of seeing it as the provider that we have to take care of, and that anyone who thinks that way is silly. But it's the smartest thinking in terms of the wonder of human beings, because the reality, even though we have behaved cruelly, we are the pinnacle of creation in terms of nature. And so that means we have a bigger responsibility. The macrocosm, which is mind-boggling when you think 100 billion galaxies, all with their suns, the intelligence doesn't grasp that. It's impossible. The term infinity, intellect doesn't grasp that. What can grasp that? The intuitive experience. We're talking about art making again. And the recognition, if anyone has found a sense of awe within themselves, they would have to realize that as a human being, if I'm able to step away from my ego and step into a vastness, which is the whole point of the little self dancing in groups, in community, you step into the larger self. And if there is largeness in your personal experience, that moment on, revere other human beings, because that potential also lies within them. And so, to answer your question directly, we are miniatures of the cosmos. And so this little body is actually nothing externally, but internally, the body is gargantuan. And so our search, our work is really internal. And those discoveries, the great discoveries, are internal.
And that gets to, talking about climate change. We need to change all of the systems around us, our energy system,
Absolutely.
all these systems. And many conversations I have about climate are people pointing out who else should change. China should change. The Republicans should change. Oil companies should change. Texas should change. There's a lot of pointing of other people should change. And when it comes to internal change or personal change, that's thought to be trivial and insignificant. So what do you say to that idea about change on a individual scale when we need to change something so massive and collective? It's hard to fathom how individual change can change something so big.
Because it's very easy to objectively look at something and say, this is how we can fix this. But it takes more rigor to say, let's reduce it to, I dislike that person. Just that alone. I dislike that person. That is a contribution of negativity. And so that takes some examination. What does it mean? Likes and dislikes, they're for children. And so if I've come to a place where I think of the community, the global community of which we're all united citizens, and it's just not me. If I think about that person, I have to say the things that I dislike in that person, do I have a trace of that in myself? And the answer is usually yes. And so that's where the first work begins. If I'm screaming peace and I'm angry and yelling and pointing the finger, I'm not inhabiting peace. So I'm not bringing peace. So it has to start with the individual. Self-reform is really what it's about. It's if I change myself, I've changed thousands. Look at what Gandhi did with his life and liberated India, which had been attempting that for 300 years, and he did it in his lifetime because he changed himself. He accepted poverty. His wife didn't sign up for that, but he said, I have to be close with the people and get rid of these distractions and feel how they feel. He went into celibacy. His wife didn't sign up for that, but he said it would bring him closer to his truth. What can you say? It has to be self-reform. We're here to change ourselves. And if we have a world of people who are working on changing themselves, that is phenomenal.
If you're just joining us, we're talking about climate change through the artist's eyes at Climate One with Alonzo King, founder of the Alonzo King Lions Ballet, and Nora Lawrence, senior curator, the Storm King Art Center near New York City. I'm Greg Dalton. What would instrumental music about climate change sound like? Classical composer Adam Schoenberg didn't know for sure, and he wasn't particularly focused on connecting his art with the natural environment. That all changed one day when Schoenberg's friend sent him an article to read. His awakening led to the creation of an acclaimed concerto called Losing Earth.
I was commissioned by the San Francisco Symphony to write a percussion concerto. After some of the details were finalized regarding the commission, I flew to San Francisco in early August of 2018. And literally the day before that flight, a colleague of mine at Occidental College texted me the New York Times Magazine article, Losing Earth, the decade we almost stopped climate change. And it was a horrifying article to read. And when I got off the plane, I just knew that somehow the percussion concerto was going to be a response to the idea of climate change, or really the fear of climate change, especially, now being a father of two young boys. It's complicated as a composer because at the end of the day, my job is still to write a piece of music that can stand on its own just as a piece of music. And so the piece just begins with the bass drums literally traveling around the hall going do-do-do-do-do-do-do. And then a big grand pause of just silence. I disrupt the orchestra by literally stopping the orchestra. And those disruptions are meant to evoke all the natural disasters that are occurring around us so that we actually snap out of our own little bubble and start to be aware of what's happening around our surroundings. The second section is dubbed as this underwater world, as if, what's happening with our receding coastlines and the sea levels rising. And then the third movement, or the third section, I should say, is really the virtuosic dance-like movement, which is really the call to arms, where the orchestra wakes up and is sort of saying, what is going on? What makes music so universal is that it is its own language, there is its own vocabulary, but it's not a language or vocabulary that everyone has to speak. You just sort of feel it. And so I think without any information, you wouldn't necessarily know that it's about climate change. But for me, it's all about artistic integrity and doing work that you wholeheartedly believe in and feel that you can put your best foot forward.
That was composer Adam Schoenberg, who wrote the concerto Saving Earth, performed by the San Francisco Symphony in 2019. Nora Lawrence, is art meaningful if you don't really know it's about climate? Can it really be a vehicle for social change, or is it just, is it just an insider thing if you don't really know? I saw that piece, by the way, at the San Francisco Symphony. It was astounding. Of course, I was thinking with climate eyes, like, ooh, yeah, this is dramatic. But if you didn't have those climate eyes on, I'm not sure that art would really enlighten you.
I see it a little differently, and maybe I just reverse it a bit, because to me, there's one thing that Adam said in there. I just wanted to make a great piece of music, or I needed to make the best piece of music I could. And that's so critical. Bad art is never going to get anybody to figure out more about it. But good art, I think, and art that really moves people and that he knows he put in his absolute best effort to, that's what's going to get somebody. They might not have come in, they don't have a climate podcast, right? They didn't come in with your perspective, but it doesn't mean that people aren't going to learn a little bit more and find out a little bit more about that piece if it's great. So I think that can also be extremely helpful, because I think one thing that can go wrong with climate art is I think sometimes if it really hits people over the head, it doesn't mean it's affecting people. It doesn't mean it's really moving them or bringing them along with the artist or anything. One artist in our show, Hara Waltz, is also she's an artist. She's also a biologist. And one thing she had said is, if I'm writing a study about climate change, I'm going to give you an essay. I'm going to give you some data and some graphs, and it's going to be rather dry. I'm not going to cry, but I might. If I'm giving you a work of art about climate change, I might show more of myself. I might do something different that inspires something else in you besides a certain part of your brain.
And Lonzo King, I've had many climate conversations where I've described things, it's very similar to what Nora just said, where climate started with physics and chemistry in outer space, and it came to like smokestacks and tailpipes and the way we use energy. And it's very cerebral and technocratic. And I've often said we need arts and we need to reach people's hearts and make them cry, as Nora said. Is that right, though, that you might see it differently, that the rational mind reaches people in a different way than the emotion of art? Your response to that?
I think that again, for me, it comes back to the human, and we are imbalanced and we are denatured. We have a balancing act between logic and feeling. In their highest realms, the union of the merging of those two, the marriage of those two, again, is met through intuition. There is nothing that exists that you can create that does not have science. It's impossible. There's nothing that doesn't have music. It's impossible. At one time, music was categorized as a science. In the Middle Ages, it was a science. That's what that category of study was. So the idea of, in a low stage, the idea of logic can be dry, calculated, predictable. The idea of feeling can be indulgent, chaotic, illegible. And those have to be elevated, again, through a human evolution of awareness And the language of these communications, be it science, be it art, because they're really married, they're not separate, is again a problem of education. If I need a docent to tell me about the experience I'm having, that's a problem. Because it either means that I'm not comfortable with my own intuitive perspective, as every artist would want you to be. This is what I say, but what do you say and what do you see? And famously, as Chopin would say, I can't listen to what Liszt is doing to my sonata. He was in awe of his interpretation. And so that engagement comes from people who from childhood were seeing paintings, were not going just to exhibits, they were painting themselves, they were dancing themselves, they were playing instruments. And the internal world of the awe and wonder of children gets cut off through that dangerous bridge of taking them out of wonder into what we call law and logic. But in reality, they work together. That's why the wonder of that internal journey that was started through yogis in India, through those rishis, they figured out how we entered these bodies through the sushumna, the finest part of the spine that's surrounded by the Ida and the Pingala, and how we return and get back to bliss. That is scientific. They looked at religion as a science. Does this work? Not belief, not feelings, but how do we get into this trap and how do we get out? And so I see it as one, that they're combined together. I just want to say that the common thinking in mainstream culture is that art is kind of fuzzy and it's the whim and desires of an individual, their idiosyncrasies. Absolutely not. The accuracy that most artists are obsessed with is the primary thing, because the result, they, just like the scientists, they're looking for truth. They're looking for the X factor, but their search begins internally and the science begins the search, the admirable search, externally, but we can meet together.
If you're watching the live stream, I encourage you to submit a question in the comment section for Alonzo King or Nora Lawrence, and we'll include that as them as we can. Nora Lawrence, we're at a time where a lot of people are reconsidering lots of things, including art, and whether it is an essential service now. Museums are closed. Alonzo just said art is vital. We've cut arts education in a lot of America. So how is art being reconsidered now in the era of COVID?
Wow. Okay. So big question. I mean, I think one thing is that artists are still working. People are still craving art. Just anecdotally at Storm King, we are one of the only, since we're all completely outdoors and since we're outside of New York City, we have been for the past month, one of the only places that people in the New York area can see art. And we have been sold out every single day. I mean, we're up to these New York State limits. We have to limit audiences, et cetera. But I think people really crave art. And I don't think it's for an escapist reason. I think it's for a whole number of reasons. I think it's for self-care. I think it's for enlightenment. I think it's for bridging something that speaks beyond today. Right. I think there are so many things right now that it's so easy to get sort of just completely obsessed with and bogged down with and involved in. But art, I think I love that, Alonzo, the way you spoke about the universe and these different stars, and just thinking about how much more is out there is something that I think art can do for people. I was also thinking, if you think microcosmically, macrocosmically, even stars fall, right? I mean, there are these lifespans of everything out there. So I think that's one way to think about it, Greg. I know we had also talked a little bit about monuments falling and what all of this means right now in the context both of COVID, of racial justice. And I think that's another thing to really think about, and a thing that I think is really important and really inspiring. I mean, I was looking at a monument, a Confederate monument today during a panel that I was watching, and how now what it has is no statue atop it, and then just all of this other art, right? All of this painting that's come in on top of that. And this isn't new. It reminds me of the Berlin Wall, right? I think there's so much there, and there's so much happening. And I think the response that people are having and thinking about in terms of what should be taking up our public space is really important. And I think also shows the ways in which people are thinking about how art should be used, and what types of art should be in our way, right?
We have a question from the audience, the Becky McGarvey for Alonzo King. How can we make art that highlights the connection with others in a time when we are being socially distant?
I think that tons of people have flooded museum sites to look at works, gone to sites to see dance, gone to deep reading of books to become enlightened and learn more about themselves vis-a-vis the world. What Nora's bringing up brings up the question to me, who is being talked to? Who are we talking to? Who are we not including? And that for me means, again, looking at the past, that how we've behaved and how to fix it. If the colonizers come into a country and don't recognize intelligence in the way crops are growing, in the knowledge of what plants can heal, which these people held, in the invisible mounds that were created by the Native Americans here, all of these brilliant levels of intelligences that were just wiped out and ignored. I mean, that's shocking. And so in that same way, who are we talking to and who are we ignoring is a big deal. And it goes back to that question again of, do we revere people? How do we look at people? And that tells everything. And to the question, I would say that what art is doing is it's like, what is it like? It's like a tuning fork. And it's especially needed for people who live in cities. It's curious that people who are farmers, agrarian, or they're in nature all the time, that is art. That is the great work of the Divine Mother. And so in cities where there's concrete and skyscrapers, we need that nurturing in another way. And individually, that same kind of nurturing can come from what? The art is, the truth is that the art is within the artist. And that pool of information, that pool of accessibility is when the mind quiets itself from distraction, when the jabbering roommate that's in your head shuts up, and there's a sense of expansion, everyone should take the time to find that. Because art is within everybody. Everyone should find that place of quietness, that place of solitude, and that place of information. Every artist talks about it. There becomes a quietness, the noise settles down, expansion comes in, and then you're swimming in a playful pool of knowledge and information.
Nora Lawrence, I'd like to ask you about how you responded to a very public and political piece of protest art recently. When you first saw Black Lives Matter painted in yellow letters on a street in Washington, D.C., Where did you see it and how did you receive it? And was it art?
So I first saw it in a very, I'd say, artistic, sort of framed in a very artistic way. So I saw it on the Instagram page of the artist Simone Lee. And I saw it as kind of an elevated, and I'm telling you this because of the aesthetics that felt important, an elevated span of the entire statement. So I didn't hear about it first, I just saw it. And I felt really, impressed and surprised. And for that to be right at the White House felt like it was an incredible day, I guess. So to me, that felt like an artistic experience, something that I didn't know was possible. I didn't know that it was coming. And that, I think also now we've seen it in a lot of other places too, right? So I think that desire for imitation is also speaking to the power that I think that gesture had.
Lonzo King, you've talked about how there's a lot of introspection now. Am I a racist? Am I selfish? Your thoughts on that and what you think of the Black Lives Matter art on the street or any of their other artistic expressions?
I think that there's a lens that's now been opened and focused on what Black, Native American, and Indigenous peoples have seen all the time, that have lived in this horror, have lived in the recognition of anti-Blackness. When you travel around the world and you'll go to communities where everyone is Black and brown, and you look up at the posters and the ads in the cities, and they're all white folks. And it's not reflecting the community or the cities that people inhabit. And you see that in institutions, you see it in ballet companies, wherever it is, because anti-Blackness is enormous and it has to be eradicated. It's huge. The idea of white supremacy, which everyone has taught. Everyone has been taught that. That's been put into people's minds. And it's only people the majority of people who say, no, that is a falsehood. To look at that and to remove that from a consciousness, that's not easy because it's deeper than the subconscious. And so when people feel white is superior, that is so deeply impacted. That doesn't come out because of one affirmation or you decide, okay, I'm going to change, which is great. That is work because it's so deep. It's in everything. It's in our educational system. It's in the hierarchy that we place all things in. It's in all media. And so that has to be re-examined. And the beautiful thing is that there got to be a point, a critical mass where people did what? They identified with oppression. They identified with the knee on someone's neck, and that became them. And the them that became is so marvelous because it's compassion. I recognize that this is injustice, is what the eyes of people were seeing. But more importantly, or additionally, I should say, is that it's connected to war, ecological disaster, religious sectarianism, the way women are treated, all of the isms, they're all interconnected. They're not separate. And so the address of this racism, the address of this brutality is the address of all oppression. And the greatest fear of oligarchs, let's be real, is the 99% joining. And so everyone who feels that they have their own oppression, it has to say, no, this is ours. All of us are suffering from this. And those are the big ones: war, ecological destruction, religious sectarianism, racism. Those are the big ones. How we treat people. How do we treat people?
Yeah, we've had a number of guests recently who talk about patriarchy and sort of extrapolation, sort of fossil fuel extraction, all connected to racism and climate. All the roots are tangled. We have a question
Absolutely.
from our Marnie in our audience. She writes, "What artworks about climate change that you have experienced, Nora and Alonzo, have most profoundly impacted you?"
Nora, you go first.
Oh, I go first.
If you don't mind, if you don't mind.
No, sure. I mean, of course, I brought some of those artists into the exhibition that I did. One that I hadn't talked about is an artist named David Brooks, who I think has really devoted most of his career to this. And I think, Alonzo, you were talking about how much science is involved in art and how close these can be and should be. And one thing that I really came to understand and really appreciate working on this show is how many artists have gone on scientific expeditions and how their perspectives that they bring back are so different from those of the scientists. And talking to my brother-in-law, who's an oceanographer, he and his wife, who's also an oceanographer, they're both saying that when they've been on expeditions with artists, it's been so important to them to get that perspective because they're not thinking like that. They're different ways of approaching a subject, and it's not that the artist is just learning from the oceanographer. It's absolutely that the oceanographer is also learning from the way that the artist thinks. So one piece that we have that I really love, that we're going to have at Storm King for forever, as David said, is called Permanent Field Observations. And I want to bring it up because I love the piece, but also I think it connects to a lot of different topics that we're getting at here. David he knows Storm King very well. We've worked with him once before, and he took a long walk through the wooded areas of Storm King and found these intersections of, let's say, a rock and a vine, or he found one that was coyote scat, and he found one that was a deer skeleton. And he cast 30 different instances into bronze and put the bronze back in the woods next to the original. So of course, as you can imagine, the coyote scat stayed next to its bronze replica for almost no time at all. The rock that's right next to it is going to be there for quite a bit longer. But the promise, and he called it permanent field observations. And so they're his favorite parts of the woods. They're hidden out there. They're not really meant to be found unless you do a close scientific observation of the woods to really look for them. And he called them permanent field observations because he wanted it to feel like an expedition. And what I think is beautiful about them is this idea of permanence, and this really questioning that he's having of what permanence really means, right? He says, okay, these have to be here forever. And so we're in the process of working out this acquisition agreement where, that's not legal to say forever, right? What does that mean to say that Storm King Art Center will make sure that this piece is going to be in these 30 locations forever? But I think it also speaks to, and so to keep them there forever, he made them in bronze, right? They're going to be there for a long time as long as nobody moves them. And I, as a person who works with outdoor art, I'm always thinking about that idea of forever or permanent. And I think that's also something with monuments that's coming up a lot. And, the question about, okay, how do we move forward? And what does it mean to memorialize a person? Or what does it mean, to call anything forever, to use bronze in the first place? So it's something that I've been thinking about a lot, and what it also means for the climate, right? Because everything's changing, and it does feel like this kind of interplay of a lot of events for me right now that I am always thinking about.
And I think of the Eastern philosophy of the impermanence of everything, right? The very notion of that. So, Alonzo?
I think what it brings up for me is when Adam was showing we saw that little clip of what was the San Francisco Symphony, and realizing that at the end of it, he said, I was left with having to make a good work. I mean, that's the bottom line. And so there's a kind of a pull, a tug of war between disruption in society and literally showing that and saying, this is my work. um, and having people say, oh, that is a recreation of what I'm experiencing. There is also work that says, while there is darkness, you still have this opportunity to alleviate it, but you can also look to the light. And so when I heard that first question, I thought, if we were to just see a baby, just a baby smiling, a month old, and we were to just watch the baby, that tells us everything about climate change, about war, about racism. Just to look at a beautiful little baby and just watch it for a long time. That is an art piece. That is as human beings, let's look at the babies. And that should answer a lot of questions and give us a lot of information. Just look at the babies.
If you're just joining us, we're talking about Climate Through the Artist's Eyes on Climate One. I'm Greg Dalton. My guests are the choreographer Alonzo King and Nora Lawrence, a curator with the Storm King Art Center. We're going to go to our lightning round, and I ask you, a true or false question and then an association question. So first, for Alonzo King, true or false, growing up, you never looked to white as something to aspire to?
No. In the community that I grew up in, I was surrounded by brilliant beautiful black faces. So that was my prejudice and the ideal for me.
True or false, Nora Lawrence, white cube art galleries reinforce the perception that white is refined and the default context for experiencing art.
I think true. I love working at Storm King and giving a different type of context to works for people.
True or false, Nora Lawrence, statues of Confederate soldiers are works of art?
I think false. I think they're more works of repetitive propaganda, stemming from, Greece, Rome before that, and meant to really reify a culture that was already in charge and reify white supremacy.
Alonzo King, true or false, all art is propaganda?
I think that one of the wonderful things about art making and the curious contradictions of it is that kind of intelligence can be used for evil or good. And also with artists, there can be artists who produce beautiful work and they're not such beautiful people. I mean, if we look at the lives of Wagner with that amazing work and a kind of messed up person with the things that he believed in, and that is the human condition. And so the irony is there could be something that was created beautifully by an artist, but what it represents is something rotten. And that's how it is.
So I'm going to ask you for this is the association part of our lightning round, to ask, first word or phrase, single word or phrase that comes to your mind, unfiltered from your subconscious. So Alonzo King, what's the first word or phrase that comes to mind when I say George Balanchine?
Water.
Nora Lawrence, what's the first word or phrase that comes to mind when I say the Terracotta Army?
Egypt.
Nora Lawrence, what comes to mind when I say Alexander Calder?
Red.
Alonzo King, your favorite vocalist?
All of them. Everyone who sings.
Nora Lawrence, an artist you think who is overrated?
Jeff Koons came into my head, so
that's what we want. That's the truth that we're after. Is that Alonzo King, and a living artist you would most like to collaborate with?
Bach. I think his work is living.
Now I know we can twist it if we want.
Alonzo King, a form of art that you can't stand?
The art of manipulation.
All right, that ends our lightning round. Thanks for getting through all of that. We have a question from Sarah Rosenberg, a listener, citing a previous guest on Climate One, Margaret Klein Solomon, who's actually was a practicing psychiatrist, and now she's a climate activist. And she talks about grieving the future that we thought we were going to have, and how art and culture contribute to this process of grieving a future that we're losing. There's so much grief in the world right now. So Alonzo, how can art process both future grief and past grief?
I want to just go back to that play around just for a second. That Calder, do you know that Calder went from painting to mobiles after seeing Josephine Baker? After seeing her dance and do those isolations, that's what inspired him to go to mobiles. Now, the question, I see that we are moving into a higher age. And unfortunately, grief and suffering are the prods to change. And the dream world that most people have in their heads, where there is harmony, where there is a oneness, where there's a collective of caring, the term that we always hear, the common good, and not common is a pejorative anymore, but the wholeness, the health of everybody. That means physical, mental, and spiritual health of the world community. We're headed there, but there is weight and darkness and contraction in that transformation. And so I see that from this darkness and this grief, you see the youth of today who are so inspiring. They're out there in the street. They're making their own voices. They have their blogs. They're bold and moving forward. This is beautiful. And the transformation of moving into a higher age, which is inevitable, we are at a place technically where we are above, unfortunately, our humanity. And so we have to accelerate the evolution of our humanity until we get to a high level. And so all the dark, negative stuff of the racism, of the sexism, of the wars, blah, 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 that is not over, but there is a huge collection of people on planet Earth who are saying no more, no more. And that is not going to stop. It's going to keep expanding. It's going to quell. So we're in a war. We're really in a war.
With ourselves internally? Are we in a war internally, or?
We're in a war internally and externally. Internally and externally. But the external is a result of our internal war. And so the peace and harmony that we're looking for, I think we're headed there. I think that the tragedy of the way that the world exists now, there's work all around about people wanting to transform, and I see it everywhere, individually and collectively.
And Nora, you've included, I think, a piece of work or referenced earlier, sort of art as helping with cultural restoration, whether it's after a hurricane. So your thoughts on art as responding to the grief we're feeling about losing the future we thought we were going to have, and we're realizing we're not going to have that future.
I think there are a few different ways of answering this. I mean, I've certainly found that art can help me understand where other people are coming from. And I think that is what we all really, really need more of is sort of a common human understanding. I've been thinking as we've been talking about this work that I saw in the Venice Biennale by Lawrence Abu Hamdan. That's a work of, it's a video piece about members of the same family shouting across something called the Shouting Valley between Syria and Israel. So they could sort of hear members of their family, and this was the only contact they had with each other. And it's haunting. I mean, it helped me sort of feel that more viscerally. And I hope it gave me more of an ability to sort of grieve with people, and something, this isn't specifically climate related at all, but just to have more of an ability for compassion. And I think that's one thing that art can really help with, is getting us all in a frame of mind where we can really understand each other. I also think that art is absolutely a reason to come together, a place to come together. It's something we're all missing so much right now, with symphonies closed, theaters closed, museums closed, etc. And one thing that I'm not sure if you've featured on Climate One, Greg, but there is a museum called the Climate Museum that's part of what they're taking on as their mission, is we're going to need a place to grieve and a way to grieve together. And that's something that they're really building into their very mission, which I think is helpful.
Another question from listener Catherine says, what if we don't put humans at the center and rethink art and climate change? Alonzo King?
What if we don't put humans at the center and rethink climate change?
Because we think, you said earlier that humans are the pinnacle of nature.
Yes, absolutely. Why? Why is that? Because humans have the ability to not only think and reason, but there's those chakras that are in the human form, those chakras of enlightenment that can be awakened. That is a big deal and something not to be wasted. But I think, again, when we're in that process of the selfish me, and then the small circular we, and then it expands into oneness, you are thinking of it. You are seeing everything not from a human center, because you're seeing the collective, that I am the lion, I am the bird that just dropped, I am the leaves, I am one with everything. I mean, that's the ultimate, where there is no separation, and it's not ego-centered. It is oneness. It's an evolutional journey from me to we to oneness. And in oneness, there is no separation from anything. That the bird, the leaf, the sand, my mother, this friend, it's all connected. It's called universal consciousness. And there's scientific techniques to wake those states of consciousness up.
Another question for Alonzo from Ann, a listener, says, shall we trust the artist and the scientist to lead the way? Apply to 2020.
I think that the trust has to be with yourself, that it has to go back to, how do you see truth, and how are you living your life and contributing to the planet? It really has to resonate with yourself, and then you'll find others of like mind or different mind, and that is either to test what you believe or come to more information from someone. But I would say you've got to, if you're a truth seeker, there has to be something that resonates inside of you. And so that inside of you needs to be present, so that you're not led off a cliff somewhere. It has to resonate with your belief systems.
We're talking about artists through the climate. We're talking about climate change through the artist's eyes at Climate One. I'm Greg Dalton. My guests are the choreographer Alonzo King of Alonzo King Lines Ballet, and Nora Lawrence, senior curator at the Storm King Art Center outside of New York City. Nora Lawrence, next year you're doing an exhibition that is thinking about space, race, and art. Tell us about that, a preview of what you're going to do next year.
Yeah, so we are working with the artist Rashid Johnson, and this was actually a project that got postponed from this year because of COVID, which was, of course, too bad. But we're doing a sculpture with Rashid, as well as a performance that is actually a ballet that he worked with the choreographer Claudia Schreier to produce. And the sculpture is called The Crisis. And one reason actually we didn't install it this year, even though we're open now, is that Rashid's idea for this piece, which is sort of it almost looks like a kind of a deconstructed bright yellow ziggurat shape at its base, but and it's about 16 feet tall. but he wanted it to be something that became one with the grasses at Storm King, and that the grasses could grow up within. And every March at Storm King, we have these native grasses that grow naturally, but every March we burn them off, which helps the soil regenerate and helps them grow up as tall and large as they can. So our plan had been in early April to situate Rashid's piece in an area of these grasses. We weren't able to do that. It wasn't going to work for the work to install it way later. But the idea with the crisis is that he wanted to think about architecture being taken over by nature again. He had been in Turks and Caicos right after the financial crash in 2008, 2009, and was looking at these sort of half-built modernist buildings like, what is this, right? And just the way that nature comes and takes something back as being quite beautiful, but also a crisis. So he was really interested with the idea of showing it in this post-COVID moment. And the hikers that we're also planning for next spring is this ballet that he devised and wanted to create after spending some time in Aspen and hiking in Aspen. And Rashid's African American, and he was finding that when he was hiking, he wasn't necessarily coming upon many people at all on his hikes, but it was even more rare that he would come upon somebody else who was Black. And so he made it into a film and then also a live performance of these two Black dancers who are first kind of moving through a large space. So they'll be out sort of in the expanse of Storm King dancing solo, but then the encounter upon finding each other. And so thinking about their bodies together, thinking about them apart, thinking about how often Black bodies are tracked and watched, and what it might be to be not in that situation, out on a hiking trail by yourself where no one is seeing you. So looking at all of these types of themes together, and we'll be performing the hikers close to the crisis in 2021.
Alonzo King, your final thoughts, bringing that together, your a Black person connection with nature at this time. We're at the end here, have to close off. Your closing thought.
I think a lot of what I've been hearing in conversation is that we're waking the heart up again. The heart has been put away. The heart has been thought of as weak and feminine. And the resurgence of the heart, of compassion, there's intelligence and brilliance in the heart. There's a knowing, and that has to be reborn and come back. In terms of seeing someone that you identify with, a Black person seeing another Black person, doesn't mean that mentally you're in harmony or in agreement at all because of your skin color. So that, it doesn't really work that way. It's again, it's your belief systems, what you hold true. And but the idea of waking up the heart instead of solely staying with the intellect, which has a limit. It has a limit, but the heart does not. And that is heartening for me, that we're looking more at the intuitive side. I think that's a big deal.
So what we're trying to do here at Climate One is integrate the head and the heart and have more holistic thinking. We've been talking about climate disruption through the artist's eyes. My guests were Alonzo King, founder, choreographer, Alonzo King's Lines Ballet, and Nora Lawrence, senior curator, Storm King Art Center, New York City. Podcasts of this and other Climate One shows are wherever you get your podcasts. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel. To end on an artistic note, we want to leave you with Alonzo King Lines Ballet dancers performing in their new video, There's No Standing Still. Thanks for joining, everyone.
Ashley, the evening news anchor for ABC 7 News in San Francisco, and I hope you and your loved ones are staying safe, healthy, and comfortable during these very challenging times. I am also a proud board member of the Commonwealth Club, one of our most important Bay Area institutions. The club has been hosting wonderful events with exciting speakers and topics in the Bay Area for over a century. In times of crisis, good information and strong connections in our community are especially important. And during the current COVID-19 crisis, the club has really stepped up. Since March 6th, the club has brought you over 150 live-streamed events with speakers and panelists, including past governors, secretaries of state, and many, many more. Every program includes a live chat, so you and viewers all over the Bay Area and beyond have been able to ask these experts the questions that are on your minds. Every program has been neutral and unbiased in true Commonwealth Club style to get to the bottom of the issues that are so drastically affecting our lives. The club has done all this public service despite being profoundly affected by the crisis. The inability to hold events for the past 2 months has forced the club to cut its budget and staffing by 50%. The remaining staff are working from home to bring the community these valuable and informative live-streamed programs. The club needs your support to continue its shelter-at-home programming. Please make a tax-deductible donation to the club now by texting the word DONATE to 329-4231. That is, donate to 329-4231, or visit the Commonwealth Club website, commonwealthclub.org. We need the club to be here in the months and years ahead to help inform and educate as we figure out how to get our society and our economy safely moving again, consider changes to the way we live, and work as a result of this crisis, and take steps to prevent a future pandemic. Once again, please support the Commonwealth Club now by texting the word DONATE to 329-4231. That is, donate to 329-4231, or visit the website commonwealthclub.org. I want to personally thank you for supporting one of our community's truly great organizations. I'll see you on ABC 7 News and at the Commonwealth Club. Stay safe.